She was just trying to get home. No crime, no warning, just a flashing light in a moment that would change everything. But when her husband arrived with the badge, what unfolded would expose not just two corrupt officers, but an entire broken system. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about what happens when ordinary people choose to speak up. And it all started on a quiet road with a woman named Jenna. The sun was sinking behind the hills of Ridgewood, a quiet town nestled just beyond the city skyline. On most evenings, Jenna enjoyed the peaceful drive home from her shift as a pediatric nurse. She loved the stillness that came with dusk, the way headlights glowed softly against the darkening streets, and how the hum of her Honda Civic felt like a lullaby after the chaos of the hospital. That night, Jenna was more exhausted than usual. A double shift, two emergencies, and a surprise inspection had drained every ounce of her energy. But she still had her routine to maintain: take the long road home through Maple Avenue, breathe in the quiet, and listen to a playlist her husband had made for her. She turned on to Maple and noticed the cruiser almost immediately. It was several car lengths back. At first, she thought nothing of it. Police patrolled here often. Ridgewood was safe, but not immune to incidents. She checked her speed, 32 and a 35. No traffic, no sudden turns. Yet the cruiser stayed behind her. The unease came slowly, wrapping around her like a cold wind. She flicked her turn signal. So did they. Then the lights flashed red and blue. She pulled over, heart racing. Jenna parked carefully, hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, just like her husband taught her. The flashing lights pulsed in her rearview mirror, an unsettling rhythm against the quiet street. She glanced around. No one else in sight, no witnesses. She took a deep breath and reached for her phone, thumb hovering over the emergency contact icon labeled Aaron Home. Her husband was more than just a loving partner. He was also the Deputy Director of Internal Affairs for the state's Bureau of Investigation, the kind of man who knew how easily things could go wrong, the kind of man who had made her memorize every step of a traffic stop. But Jenna hesitated. It's probably nothing, she told herself. No need to escalate, no need to involve Aaron. She rolled down her window as the officer approached. He was tall, stocky, and wore sunglasses even though the sun had nearly set. His name tag read Hobbs. "License and registration," he barked, skipping any greeting. Jenna complied, her voice steady. "Sure, officer. May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Hobbs looked at her, lips curling slightly. Erratic driving, swerved near the last turn. That didn't sound right. She hadn't swerved. She hadn't even changed lanes. Something was off. Jenna handed over her documents, her fingers just barely trembling. Hobbs took them with a grunt, barely glancing at them before stepping back toward his cruiser. She watched him in the side mirror. He didn't walk, he swaggered. And he didn't go straight to his car. Instead, he leaned on the hood, talking into his shoulder mic. It was casual. Too casual. Like he was waiting for something. Then she saw the second cruiser pull up behind his. 2 officers for a minor swerve? Her instincts flared. She'd heard Aaron talk about officers who ran unlogged stops, how they'd call in backup without dispatch when they wanted to avoid accountability. She reached for her phone again, determined now to call her husband. Before she could unlock the screen, a second officer appeared at her window, this one younger, leaner, and scanning the inside of her car with a flashlight, despite the visibility. "Mind us stepping out of the vehicle, ma'am?" he asked, tone clipped. Jenna looked at him carefully. "Is there a reason? We've had reports of drug activity matching your car's description." Her mouth went dry. Drug activity? Her Civic still had stuffed animals in the back seat and a half-eaten granola bar in the cup holder. This was no routine stop. Jenna unbuckled her seatbelt, heart pounding. "I'm stepping out," she said clearly, voice calm despite the storm rising in her chest. She remembered Aaron's voice. "Always stay composed. Document in your mind. Every second matters." She kept her hands visible, opened the door slowly, and stepped onto the sidewalk. Officer Hobbs circled around with a look of suspicion far deeper than the situation warranted. "We're going to need to search the vehicle," he said flatly. "I don't consent to a search," Jenna replied, her voice steady. "Ma'am, you can't withhold consent when we have probable cause." "And what's the cause?" she asked. She matched a tip from a neighbor. The younger officer added quickly, like they were playing a well-rehearsed script. Jenna's mind raced. No way they had probable cause. No way this was about a swerve. Then she watched as Hobbs opened her trunk without asking. Inside were boxes of pediatric equipment, diapers, thermometer kits, leftover supplies from a hospital drive. Hobbs rifled through them like he expected to find bricks of contraband. Jenna's hand moved to her smartwatch. 3 taps. Emergency beacon sent. To Aaron. She didn't know where this was going, but she knew how fast it could go bad. Aaron Rowe was already reviewing case files when his watch vibrated. Emergency. Location, Maple and Rosewood. Jenna. He stood up so fast his chair crashed behind him. He didn't grab his coat. Didn't wait for protocol. He just grabbed his badge and bolted. Car! He barked into his office radio. Within seconds, he was in an unmarked black SUV, lights flashing. A call went out to his trusted federal contact, Special Agent Quinn. She activated the beacon. Quinn's tone changed immediately. You think it's related to the precinct leak? Aaron didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Jenna had no criminal record. Nothing about her life warranted suspicion, which meant this stop wasn't about her, it was about him. He drove like a man possessed, every second screaming too late in his mind. He knew precincts where officers still whispered about him with contempt. He knew corruption ran deeper than anyone liked to admit. He also knew what men like Hobbs were capable of when they thought no one was watching. But tonight, they had picked the wrong woman. Back on the roadside, things were spiraling. The younger officer, name-tag Bishop, was now holding a clear plastic bag. White powder. That's not mine, Jenna shouted. Bishop shrugged. Funny, it was under the seat. Pretty convenient. She couldn't breathe. You planted that. You know I didn't have anything. Ma'am, we're placing you under arrest for possession of a controlled substance, Hobbs announced. The handcuffs clicked over her wrists. No Miranda rights? You'll hear them at the station, Hobbs muttered. Her smartwatch vibrated once, confirmation the alert had gone through. Somewhere Aaron knew. Somewhere he was coming. Still, the panic rose like fire in her throat. What if this was more than profiling? What if they were setting her up as revenge? Was this how they silenced people who got too close? She was shoved into the back of the cruiser. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to break. She'd done nothing wrong, and someone would pay for trying to make her feel otherwise. Aaron pulled up fast, slamming the SUV into park just feet from the cruiser. When Hobbs saw him, he visibly paled. Aaron stepped out in a dark suit, no tie, the badge hanging from his neck like a blade. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He walked, with purpose, control, and fury simmering just below the surface. Release her, he said. Hobbs didn't move. I said release her. Now, said Bishop stuttered. We have a charge. Drugs under the seat. Aaron's face didn't even twitch. What's her name? Bishop blinked. What? You arrested a woman and you don't know her name? Silence. You didn't ask for consent. You opened a vehicle with no warrant. You've got no camera on. You're on a quiet road with no witness. And you're telling me this was about a turn signal? He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. The recording from Jenna's smartwatch began playing, muffled voices, and then Bishop clearly saying, That's not mine. Hobbs. Pretty convenient. Congratulations, Aaron said, stepping forward. You just got recorded committing a felony. Bishop backed away first. I didn't know she was your wife, he stammered. Aaron laughed without humor. That's the problem. You thought it was okay because you didn't. He turned to Hobbs. You're done. Call your supervisor. Call your union rep. Hell, call your mother, but let her know you're going to need a lawyer. I didn't plan anything, Hobbs tried. Aaron pulled out another phone. Your radio chatter was being monitored. We were testing precincts flagged for misconduct. Yours was top of the list. He wasn't lying. The pilot program, still classified, had flagged Hobbs twice in the past month. Jenna's arrest just gave them proof. You were so eager to flex your power, you forgot the world has changed. No more shadows, no more silence. Jenna stepped out of the cruiser. Her wrists were red, but her eyes were sharp. She walked to Aaron's white. Are we done here? She asked. Almost, he said. They're going to need to answer for this, not just to me, to the Bureau, to internal affairs, to everyone watching. A siren wailed in the distance, real backup and real justice. By the time Lieutenant Claire Monroe arrived, it was over. Jenna was free. Bishop was sobbing. Hobbs was handcuffed, ironically with his own set. Aaron handed over 2 USB drives and 3 witness affidavits, one from a jogger who saw the arrest, and 2 from residents who'd come outside. Claire took one look at the evidence and ordered both officers detained for obstruction and misconduct. She pulled Aaron aside, replying, "You think this was personal?" Aaron didn't answer right away. He looked at Jenna, strong, standing tall, even after what they'd put her through. "Yes," he said, "but not just against me, against every person who couldn't call someone with a badge to save them." Claire nodded. "Then we go all the way. I'll notify the commissioner." As the scene wrapped, Aaron walked Jenna back to the SUV. He held her hand for a long moment. No words needed. She was safe. But they both knew the fight was only beginning. That night, the story broke. A nurse falsely arrested, a drug charge disproven, 2 officers under investigation, an internal affairs officer married to the victim. It was everything the department didn't want the public to see. By morning, the footage had gone viral. Hashtags, protests, news vans outside their home. Aaron didn't flinch. He went to the press conference with Jenna by his side. She stood in scrubs, her wrists still red. No tears, no dramatics, just the truth. "I cooperated. I followed every instruction. And still I was treated like a suspect before I was even seen as a person." The reporters fell silent. Aaron stepped forward next. "If they can do this to my wife," he said, "imagine what they do to people with no one watching." And just like that, the story turned into a movement. But Aaron and Jenna knew the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. In the days following the press conference, Jenna returned to the hospital. She thought she could slip back into routine, but the world wouldn't let her. Co-workers stopped her in the hall. Some offered sympathy, others just nodded. Quiet solidarity. A few shared their own stories, bad stops, unfair searches, silent fears. Jenna had become more than a nurse that week. She was now a symbol, and while she appreciated the support, it was exhausting. Everyone saw her differently now, not just as a caregiver, but as a survivor of something bigger than herself. When she got home that night, Aaron was already at the kitchen table. Laptop open, phone buzzing nonstop. He looked up. "They want us to speak at the academy next week. About what happened. About what should have happened." Jenna sat beside him, pulled off her shoes, and rested her head against his shoulder. "Let's do it," she whispered. "But only if we tell them everything." Aaron nodded, his jaw set. Everything was exactly what this system needed to hear. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the city, a rookie officer named Natalie Brooks replayed the body cam footage she wasn't supposed to have. She had been stationed near Hobbs's precinct for 3 months, and she'd kept notes. Every comment, every unlogged stop, every suspicious shift assignment. She wasn't stupid. She knew who Hobbs was, what kind of power he abused, but Natalie wasn't sure what to do. Reporting him meant risking everything, until she saw Jenna's story on the news. That was the tipping point. She loaded her USB drive with all the evidence she'd secretly compiled. Dozens of interactions, some violent, some casual, all wrong. Then she made one call. "I have information about systemic misconduct," she told the internal affairs operator, "and I have proof." She didn't know it yet, but her file would blow the case wide open, because Hobbs wasn't a lone wolf. He was part of a network, and Jenna had just cracked it. Aaron spent his next week reviewing the files Natalie submitted. It was worse than he expected. Dozens of flagged cases, a pattern of arrests in low-income neighborhoods, a chain of forged affidavits, evidence mishandled or conveniently disappearing, and every officer involved traced back to Hobbs's rotation schedule. This wasn't just misconduct, it was a criminal enterprise. Jenna read over his shoulder one night, her hands tightening around her tea mug. "These aren't just random," she said, "they're targeting." Aaron nodded. "And it's been going on for years. Quiet, precise, like they thought no one would notice." He picked up his phone. "We need to call Quinn. This is federal now." Jenna reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You told me once this job would ask more of you than you were ready to give." "And?" "You were wrong, Michael," she said gently. "You were always ready." 2 nights before the academy presentation, Jenna sat alone in their living room. She opened her laptop and began typing. Not a speech, a letter. To every woman who's ever been pulled over and made to feel like a threat, to every nurse, teacher, daughter, or mother who's been silenced in the name of protocol, to every man who's ever had to prove his humanity before his innocence. This isn't just about me, it's about us. She wasn't sure where she'd send it, a blog, the department bulletin, maybe the local paper. But the words poured out of her like a truth long buried. It wasn't just about that one night anymore. It was about never letting it happen again. The academy hall was packed. Cadets in stiff uniforms lined the room, instructors pacing in the back. The commissioner himself was seated up front. Aaron took the mic first, speaking in clipped, measured tones. Policy, protocol, misconduct reporting systems. Then it was Jenna's turn. She didn't stand at the podium. She walked down the aisle and stood in the middle of the room, so they had to look her in the eye. "I'm not here to give you rules," she said. "I'm here to remind you of something more important." She paused. "Your badge isn't permission. It's a promise, Brian." The room went still. "You're not just enforcers. You're protectors. And when you forget that, you break something you may never be able to fix." Some cadets squirmed. Others leaned forward. One began to cry. Jenna's voice softened. "I'm not a lawyer or a politician. I'm just a woman who didn't deserve what happened. And you have the power to make sure it doesn't happen again." When she stepped off the stage, the applause started slow, but it didn't stop. 2 days after the community forum, Aaron received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. Attached were redacted radio logs, incident reports, and a suspicious pattern of dismissed internal complaints, all linked to one name, Captain Vance Mercer. Mercer had been Hobbs' direct superior. On paper, he was spotless. Commendations, decades of service, zero disciplinary action. But the files revealed something different. Over 40 internal complaints redirected, buried, or mysteriously lost under his watch. Aaron stared at the screen, jaw tightening. This wasn't just about rogue officers anymore. This was a system, and Mercer was sitting at the top of it. Elsewhere in the city, Officer Natalie Brooks, who had leaked internal documents about Hobbs, found a letter on her windshield after her shift. "You picked the wrong side." No signature, just a message and a threat. She called Aaron immediately. "They're scared," he said, voice steady. "That means we're winning." That evening, Jenna visited Natalie, bringing coffee and solidarity. She saw the younger officers shaking hands and exhausted eyes. "You didn't just speak up," Jenna said. "You lit the first match." "I just didn't want anyone else getting hurt," Natalie whispered. "And now," Jenna replied, "we'll make sure your truth lights up the whole department." A week later, after a public accountability meeting, Aaron and Jenna crossed paths with Captain Mercer in the parking garage. "I hear you're stirring the pot," Mercer said casually, but there was venom beneath the words. Aaron didn't flinch. "If the pot is full of rot, it deserves to be stirred." Mercer stepped closer, his voice lower. "You're making enemies, Ro. Not everyone in the department appreciates a traitor in their ranks." Jenna spoke before Aaron could reply. "Not a traitor, a truth teller. And it's not just his rank you should worry about. It's the people watching now." Mercer's smirk faded slightly. They walked away, but Jenna could feel the heat of his gaze long after they left. The war had begun. When the evidence was undeniable, Aaron made the call. The FBI's Joint Integrity Task Force launched Operation Clean Slate, an early morning raid on Ridgewood PD and several connected precincts. 14 arrests, 5 command-level suspensions. Mercer in handcuffs. Jenna watched the news from the hospital break room. Her coworkers stood around her in stunned silence. When her name was mentioned as the whistleblower's inspiration, the room erupted in applause. She didn't smile. Not yet, because real justice wasn't applause. It was change. And that would take more than one arrest. At the city's final public hearing, Jenna took the stage. She wore no makeup, no blazer, just her nurse scrubs and a calm fire in her voice. "I was pulled over for nothing. I was humiliated, and I was lucky, because someone showed up with a badge. But most people don't have that luxury, and they shouldn't need it to be treated like a human being." A silence settled over the audience. Aaron stood to the side, watching her with pride. Jenna continued, "We can't unsee what we've seen. We can't unknow what we now know. So let's make that mean something." When she stepped down, the crowd stood. And from that day forward, Ridgewood was never the same again. The investigation sparked a tidal wave of reform proposals, new policies on body cam requirements, mandatory consent-based searches, and third-party civilian oversight panels were introduced across the state. But real change didn't happen overnight. There was resistance, internal murmurs about overreach and betrayal. Some officers resigned, others tried to quietly undermine the reforms. But the tide had shifted. The old guard was no longer untouchable. Jenna found herself speaking at town halls, universities, even high schools, not as a politician, but as a person who knew what fear felt like and what justice was supposed to look like. "We're not asking for special treatment," she told one audience. "We're asking for equal protection. That's not radical. That's the promise this country made." The crowd gave her a standing ovation. And this time, she smiled. Officer Natalie Brooks, no longer a rookie, was offered a transfer to a larger department with better pay and a fresh start. She turned it down. Instead, she applied to lead the new internal accountability unit in Ridgewood. "I want to fix what I saw broken," she told Jenna. "Not from somewhere safe, but right here." "You're braver than you think," Jenna replied. Natalie shook her head. "I'm just done being quiet." Together, they created a monthly roundtable where officers and citizens could speak without rank or fear. For the first time in the department's history, officers listened. And change didn't just come from the top. It came from inside. 1 year later, other cities began replicating Ridgewood's model. Community liaisons were embedded in precincts. Data transparency became law. And reports of racial profiling and traffic stops dropped 37% statewide. But it wasn't just numbers. It was stories, people who spoke up, officers who walked away from toxic cultures, students who saw Jenna on the news and decided to study law. Change wasn't loud. It was persistent. And Jenna, she was no longer just the woman who'd been pulled over. She was a mother, an advocate, a voice of quiet revolution. She and Aaron had weathered the storm and built something stronger in its place. At the final review hearing, Aaron submitted his full investigation summary. It ended with a single quote: "Justice is not what you say in a courtroom. It's what you do when no one is watching." When asked to make a closing statement, he didn't speak about power or protocol. He spoke about Jenna. She didn't have a badge, she didn't have backup, but she had the courage to say this isn't right. And because of that, the system had to answer. There was no applause, just silence and nods. The kind that meant they understood, and maybe, finally, they were ready to do better. That evening, Jenna and Aaron walked hand in hand through their quiet neighborhood, the same route where it all began. No police cruisers trailing, no fear in her chest, just peace. The leaves rustled softly in the trees. Porch lights glowed. It looked the same, but everything had changed. "I don't want to be remembered just for what happened to me," Jenna said quietly. "You won't be," Aaron replied. "You'll be remembered for what came after." She smiled, not because it was over, but because they had turned pain into purpose, injustice into action, silence into a movement. And the road ahead? Still long, still uncertain. But now they walked it together. Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins with courage. One voice, one choice, and the refusal to stay silent can ripple through an entire system. When we speak out, not just for ourselves, but for those who can't, we build the kind of world where accountability isn't feared, it's expected. Because real change isn't loud, it's relentless.